is pretty cool. All right. Well, welcome everybody after that little intro. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. I'm a historical fiction writer and an eclectic reader. And today it is the end of the month. Did you know that at the end of every month, I try to do a video that talks about recommendations for readathons for the next month? That's right. I'm trying to provide reading recommendations in a timely fashion for you all out there scrambling for your TBR, if anyone does those anymore. So basically, hi Booktube. I'm talking about 3 main readathons, 2 more than one, and books that I recommend that I think are really great, but also my pile of possibilities. So I have a small pile where I think I will be reading these for these 3 favorite readathons. If you're interested in readathons and reading along with other folks, November has plenteous readathons, and Pages with Paige, Paige, is the channel to look for all of them. But I'm going to be talking about Nonfiction November in its 10th and final year by A Book Olive. Indigenous reading, which is sort of decentralized and sort of turned into a year-long readathon called Studis by Native Lady Book Warrior. As far as I know, I just checked this and saw that that was the case and thought, oh, I didn't know to look for that in January. So I'm still going to be concentrating my, radar on Indigenous Lit in November, but that has expanded. And Historathon. So there's a historical fiction readathon that is run by a group of folks on Booktube. And don't get it confused. There is a Historathon that is a nonfiction reading history through different time periods through the year. And there's historical fiction that is just November and any time of history, but fiction. So they're separate. They just have the same name, which is pretty confusing. So welcome, and that is what's up. I had a piece of paper that told me my picks for the 4 words that Olive chooses for Nonfiction November. And yesterday I spent like 20 minutes looking for this piece of paper and couldn't find it. So I had to redo my picks. And this is like my least favorite thing in the whole world, is finding out that I did the thinking work and then I have to do more thinking work, the same thinking work again. So just like I don't like formatting my books because I have to do the same work over and over again to find the trial and error that will work, this was a little frustrating. So the pile of books that I'm going to talk about today is going to be a little smaller than usual, and I will be taking you through recommendations on my bookshop page. So I'm going to share that. Nope, not that one. That one. There we go. And I don't think it does it automatically, so we can wait on that. Okay. So like I said, 3 readathons that I'm most interested in, and my pile of possibilities for each will come at the end because it's kind of be smooshed together and mixed around. But I will say, let's start with Historathon because my recommendations for that are going to be real simple. Oh my gosh, look, I've got chat on the screen. So if you didn't notice, or if you're here for the first time, you didn't notice that I changed my format of the stream. So let's get that out of the way. Let's do this. So I started using Streamlabs and experimenting, and I just changed the theme before this because I thought I would see what it looked like. I've got a live background, which is like a room with glowy lights and like stars shooting and books and coziness. I thought that was cute. And then I made my stream video a little bit smaller so that you could see some of the background. And then we had a chat window and then it went away. So I guess I can't have a ticker and a chat window. Interesting. I'm learning Streamlabs. It's a new platform, so you'll have to learn along with me. Books, Gers, and Purrs. Leslie is here. Happy Sunday. Catpaw, Rosales. Hello, Catpaw. Wait, are you doing all the readathons simultaneously? Yes, but not to the letter. Just sort of getting in the spirit of things. That makes it doable. Leslie says, that's like when I read a chapter and forget the very next day what I read. Yeah. Readathons. Anita is here. Hi, Anita. I don't think you're being silenced. The text box was on the screen. I'm not crazy, right? I did see that for a second, but now I'm going back to popping your chat up on the screen. So I think, see, this was like 2 days ago now, so I can't remember who, but we were talking about the ability. I think it may have been Kay Parquet and the ability to put chats up on the screen, and you can in Streamlabs. So I'm not sure why they had an issue. Well, if I think of who it is, I will circle back and let them know that you can do it. Okay, so let's start with Historathon. Historical fiction for November. I have 5 shelves worth of historical fiction, mostly 18th, 19th, early 20th century. And that's probably like 40 books to choose from. That is too much to go through for you guys. So I will just say I'm not going to choose ahead of time. I'm more of a mood reader for historical fiction. But I will say you have 2 editions of my book to choose from if you want to read historical fiction. So just putting that out there. This is the most read. So I just volunteer The Keening. It's book 1 of a trilogy. It takes place in the 1820s in Scotland, and it's got great setting and atmosphere, and it's about social change and a family trying to stay on their land, stay together, and then when they get swept away, sort of hold on to each other in the catastrophes that follow. So that would be a great recommendation for Historathon for November. Nonfiction November. So a book Olive, like I said, doing this for her 10th and final year before she moves on. She, for the past few years, has done, instead of prompts, has done words. Oh, the chat is back. See, what is happening with that? Why is it only sometimes? I'm going to have to figure that out. Interesting, but I like it. So her words for this year, and you can take them and interpret them any way you like. You can double up. Like there's really no rules. It's just sort of a fun association game, which I love. I love word association. The words are code, path, shot, and join. So they're not related. You don't have to like get them all at once. But they should suggest what you should choose and then make your justification, right? Kind of like the board game Apples to Apples, where you get 2 cards and you have to relate the cards in a way and explain it so that people believe you and you get points or something like that. I think that's a long time. That was at college, so I'm not sure if I'm remembering that game correctly. But those are the words. So here's the definite one. I'm definitely going to be reading this because I'm buddy reading it with Anya from Well Traveled Books. So for Code, No Logo by Naomi Klein. Now, the tricky part about this is that it's vintage. It was published in 2000. Oh boy. And just to give you a sense of the flavor, the dedication quote is from Indonesian writer Y.B. Mangguwijaya, 1998. You might not see things yet on the surface, but underground, it's already on fire. So No Logo is about brand and business and media and how we communicate, how we recognize things. Let's see. If the world, let's see, that's GQ. Do I want to read the GQ? Klein, a young, funky heiress to Chomsky, writes valiantly about resistance to the multinational mindset, making this welcome book of conscientious objection one of this year's most resonant. So it's about the end of the 90s, sort of corporate takeover, multinational corporate takeover, the way society was changing and the way society's ability to read things was changing. So I've had this on my list for a long time. Anya and I are going to be reading it, and we're going to flag the dated things to each other in our discussion, and then see if we can figure out parallels for today and share them with each other so that we can bring it up to date a little bit. Because I have a friend who was reading a book from like 2000, and it was about how the media cycle has gotten faster and faster. And so 20 years later, like, it's even more. So I think it's going to be kind of like this, and we'll have to bridge that gap to make it current. But I'm excited to be reading that. It will be for Climathon as well as Code for Nonfiction November. So that will finally get read off my shelf. I've probably had it for like 10 years maybe. So that's very cool. Then we have Path. What did I do for Path? Okay, the one that I haven't read yet for Climathon, also on the list, Encounters with the Archdruid by John McPhee. So I did start it, but I haven't picked it up since I mentioned it on the channel. This is my brown cover for Herkied's rainbow prompt as well. Narratives about a conservationist and 3 of his natural enemies. So again, Climathon and Nonfiction November, and on my list for Path. Let's see. Shot. What did I say for this one? So Shot is going to be a mix of Indigenous literature and Nonfiction November. I'm putting this on my list for this year. It was down the list last year, and I obviously didn't get to it. The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Troyer. So this is Native America from 1890 to the present, because 1890 is the date of the tragedy at Wounded Knee, which is something in the Dakotas where people were betrayed, slaughtered, massacred. A dark slash in our Native American history. And there's a book about Wounded Knee called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee that's very famous by Dee Brown, who is not Native. And I have that on my shelf too, but I figured I would read this one first. And so this, because a lot of people were shot on that day, qualifies for the shot prompt. But I'm looking for this to provide a lot more context and a lot more knowledge of how it affected the tribes that were there that I wouldn't know about. So Nonfiction November and Studis or Skoden or Indigathon. I'm sort of, all the previous iterations are inherent in the Indigenous literature readathon that I'm embracing this November. So that's for Shot. And then I've got Join. So that's the 4th word. And for Join, I've got ideas. So I started reading Chris Hedges' Empire of Illusion, but it's too depressing. So I think I'm going to switch to a different book that is similar in theme for Join. And that is Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy by Christopher Lasch. So he's a pretty famous writer from, I think, like the 80s and 90s. And this is going to be talking about what's changing and going badly wrong with the values and beliefs of America's professional and managerial elites. So basically, I think, and we'll see if this is true, but what attracted me to this book was that there's this theory in my head about the Scottish Highlanders and how they used to be a very clan-focused and tight-knit culture when they were separated from the rest of the British Isle. And they had a serious consideration for what the individual family level owed the sort of head of the clan and what the head of the clan owed the individual families. and it was sort of a social contract, or at least that's what I've read, and it may be romanticized, right? But then you have industrialization, and those social contract bonds were really broken apart, and people were atomized so they could be made money off of, basically. And so when I think about in America, our, you know, Great Society kind of era was where people had a rebuilding mindset. Like, we just got after World War II, we pulled together, we sacrificed, and now we're going to come together to make this new project. And of course, civil rights was on the horizon, but not quite there yet. So before that happened, some of the culture had that idea of a social contract where people who had the most money pay the highest tax rate, and had social programs, and you had a safety net. And then, 20 years later, it was all being dismantled. So the elites somehow, and I'm hoping like this will explain why, like, people who are many times in the evangelical community are the ones that are trying to break it up, or maybe they're being co-opted by the cynical 1%. I don't know. I'm curious about this, how the Reagan era led to the changes that that really say the elites don't owe anything to the rest of society. They think they got there on their own, and that just tears apart the social safety net and all that garbage got us where we are now. So Christopher Lasch, I'm looking forward to that. And the reason I choose it for Join is because I feel like the revolt of the elites was a breaking apart. But if people knew about this, they would be much more motivated and energized to come back together and fight for being a culture that cares about each other again. So fingers crossed, the election around the corner. There we go. Yeah, so it's popping up new chats and then they're disappearing. So maybe I just need to change the theme or edit the theme, because it's like down here there's a chat box, but it's only for the new text and it doesn't last very long. So we'll figure it out. We'll tinker around in there. Yes, Jim is joining the chat at the Join Nonfiction November prompt. Very nice. Emma Bennett is here. Hey, hey. And boop the like button. Thank you. Richard being very funny here. Okay, so those are my 4 pile of possibility prompts for Nonfiction November. If you have plans for this, let me know below. They're very, very flexible. And yeah, 4 books for 1 readathon is kind of a lot for me. So we'll see. We'll either be flexible and do a lot of doubling up and double dipping, whatever you want to call it, or we just won't read all of them. But I mean, this is doable, especially because I already have these on the list for Climathon, which is a year-long readathon. And I don't know, they've been on my shelf for a while. This one hasn't, but yeah. So hope springs eternal. Okay, so that's a Nonfiction November, and we covered Historathon. So we're gonna move on to Indigenous literature. So I like focusing on this in November because, like several American holidays, they're sort of problematic, and they celebrate things that, when examined, aren't the greatest. So if you're going to be aware of what you're championing and celebrating, you probably want to choose wisely, right? So Thanksgiving is a very whitewashed holiday. I like the fact that it's about family coming together. I like the fact that it's called Thanksgiving, and that at some level it's about celebrating people coming together and surviving together and being kind and generous. Now, what's left out is that it's the Native Americans who saved the first settlers here, and then they got totally steamrolled, massacred, stolen from, betrayed in the years and decades and centuries following. So there's no like happy ending to the story, which is kind of hard to celebrate. But that's why we celebrate the fact that they are still here, right? So Indigenous literature is proof that Indigenous tribes, families, traditions are still here and going strong and striving to support their people and continue their tradition, and even in some cases, like reach out and help other people who are struggling still. So in that spirit, I would say it's a Thanksgiving that the indigenous folks are here and not haven't turned their back on the settlers completely. So thank you. um, so I'm gonna go over my pile of possibilities for indigenous lit. Yeah. So we'll just hold this up again because this has been on a couple different uh TBRs and I haven't gotten to it. I got this book new, folks, The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson, with this beautiful embroidered looking cover, and it's big, it's a chunker. So I think that's kind of intimidating me. Let's see. One snowy winter's day, Rosalie Ironwing returns to the home from which she was taken as a child. Orphan, widow, and mother, journalist, and gardener, Rosalie has spent the previous 2 decades watching as her white husband's family farm is threatened, first by drought and then by a predatory chemical company. Now grieving, she finally begins to confront the past and embrace the future, and in the process learns what it means to be descended from women with souls of iron, women who have protected their families, their traditions, and a precious cache of seeds through generations of hardship and loss. So I don't think I ever read that blurb. That has me excited because the title Seed Keeper makes me think it's about guarding seeds for future generations, which, while a cool concept, is not something I connect with. But listening to this, there's lots of different threads that I have been reading about and connecting to. So that gets me a little bit more excited. Again, this and Heartbeat of Wounded Knee are big, so I'm going to need to divide it up and really sort of budget my reading time for this. But I mean, it's doable. It's doable. I typically do like 7 books every 2 weeks, 14 books, well, more like 12 a month, the way it divides up. So like 5 for the combined readathons with mood reading on the side should be doable. So questions, any questions on any of those nonfiction or indigenous or historical fiction recommendations? Because not recommendations, possibilities. One of these is a buddy read. If anyone else wants to buddy read any of the others, I don't know, chime in. I'm going to go through my recommendations. So they're all mixed in, like I said, recommendations for the different readathons, but I'll point out which ones are for which if you have a certain interest. So Book and Dagger, I listened to recently. It's about the academics who were reached out to at the beginning of World War II for the US to start a spy network. And it was how analysts really were the backbone of the American spy program because it didn't have any at the beginning of World War II, and it really needed one. And there were fascinating behind the scenes looks into how you would spy, communicate, find out information from people in academia whose life work is about finding out information. So like librarians, such heroes. So I loved that. I recently finished The Indian Card, also on audiobook. And this is a nonfiction about one woman's investigations of what it means to be Indian in the context of American policy. So she is an enrolled part of a tribe in North Carolina, and she's curious about, well, what's the definition? What was the definition before? How has it changed? Who are the players who are making it change? And really getting into lots of fun spreadsheets about how the tribes have approached this differently. So I am buddy reading this currently with Amy at A-Star Reads, who is also a descendant of a tribe, but in Washington State, so a little closer to me. And we're having a really great, I mean, I'd call it a discussion, but she's basically educating me so far. So maybe when she's finished, like, we can come back and I can basically what I'm adding to the discussion is other things. So like metaphors for other areas of policy and history, and sort of seeing if it resonates with her. So I'm excited about this, the Indian card. So that would work for Nonfiction November and Indigathon related readathons. Firekeeper's Daughter is Indigenous lit, as well as Warrior Girl Unearthed, which is later. These are both written by Angeline Booley, and she is someone who was in federal government as a native and now is a full-time author. She's pretty awesome. These books are new adult aimed, but tackle a lot of policy issues. So you'll hear about missing and murdered Indigenous women and that movement to combat violence against women in that community. You'll hear about remains and the situation with museums that have cultural items, religious items, and actual bones and remains that are refusing to give them up to the tribes who they belong to, and what that fight is like, and actual like legal stuff, which is pretty fascinating in this fiction. So she does a really good job of weaving in real policy battles, but in a way that is very narrative based and lots of action and like I said, sort of new adult focused. So people who are um, still finding their identity, and you get to see the sort of conflicts that shows. So great. I love Angeline Booley's books so far. The next one here is also Indigenous lit. It's called The Truth According to Ember. I got this new, and it's by Danica Nava. So she's a new to me author. This is Indigenous romance, contemporary, and it's a workplace romance, which I love. And The Truth According to Ember takes place in Oklahoma and has several different tribes represented. There's the conflict between urban and rural Native experiences. There's her need for independence. She's about mid-20s, and the obstacles in her path to success and how she goes about finding them and messes up, but ultimately prevails. So I loved this. I just finished it, and it will be in my next wrap up. Moon of the Crusted Snow. Everyone has probably heard of this for Indigenous lit. It's by Wabgishig Rice, a Native writer, and it's kind of horror, kind of suspense, kind of dystopian. And it's about basically a small community, rural community, dealing with being cut off from the rest of the world and figuring out what's happening within their community at this creepy time, as well as fending off outsiders trying to get in, and just points of view I had never considered, and very suspenseful. So like well written action. So I love that. Hi, Diane. Welcome. We're going through November readathons, and I've gone through my pile of possibilities, which is like quite small, and now we're going through recommendations. Hi, JC. Yeah, and Leslie likes the cover with the embroidery as well. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I'm going to scroll down here. We've got 25 to go through, so we're a quarter of the way through. The Heat Will Kill You First would be a great choice for Nonfiction November. This is a book by Jeff Goodell that I loved because it takes individual anecdotal stories of people experiencing the effects of climate change and talking about, in his journalistic manner and a very compassionate way, how it affects people now instead of what's down the road and what could happen. And he's focusing on heat, so like temperature rise, as one of the, if you remember me talking about the last climate book, which I think was Slow Down, it talked about the donut model and how there's all these different fronts basically that challenge the Earth's limitations. And so if you pick one of them and go too far, we're fucked. So like there's, I think, 7 different versions of this, and heat is one of them. So he's specifically talking about different ways heat is hurting people, even in developed countries, and why that means we should change our behaviors and hold businesses to account that are contributing to this. Another nonfiction November double dip with Studis is Gathering Moss, and you'll also see Braiding Sweetgrass on this list, so I'll talk about them together. These are 2 books by the amazing Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a scientist and native writer who has become very popular lately. I love moss, so I read the moss book first because Braiding Sweetgrass is more famous, and of course I'm allergic to hype, so I went back to her earlier book, which is from an academic press. And she's got a new one coming out in November called The Serviceberry, which is like a history of the role of the serviceberry plant in indigenous culture, which is really fascinating. I'm very excited for that to come out. But the 2 on my list here, I can recommend because I've read them. And the reason I love them so much is that she talks about science things, like nature things, in a way that I can understand. And also is very gentle about educating people when they're doing things wrong. So it's not reactive, and it's understanding of biases and history, and just really compassionate in terms of trying to explain what immense knowledge indigenous tribes have and how knowledge sharing and mutual respect will get us to a much better place. And so, like, knowledge sharing, start with the books and then try to ripple out from there would be my plan of action. Next, there is Disposable City by Mario Alejandro Ariza. And he is a journalist as well, like Jeff Goodell. And he focused on Miami for like a cross section of climate catastrophe effects. So he basically does all of the 7 pushing out frontiers, including ocean acidification, including sea level rise, including chemical pollution and heat and all this other things, but looks at it through the lens of one city because it's a very vulnerable city. And so if you're in Florida, you might want to take a look. It was really well told. There's lots of news stories that I hadn't heard of that he highlights, as well as scientific studies, and makes them very understandable. So definitely recommend this. Orchard is another nonfiction November focused on nature. It takes a year's worth of seasonal changes in a small portion of land, like a few acres, that has been rewilded. And it's in the middle of England. It's surrounded by all this other stuff, but it's become a little oasis for nature to rebound. And so this photographer and this scientist focused on this land to observe the changes that came over it, and if we did this to more land, the benefits that we could observe following from that. And it was lovely. There's a few pictures, but what I appreciated was sort of making more relatable to my life things that I have no knowledge of, like insects, or interest in, like zombie insects, until they talked about it, and then I was like, wow, that's so cool. The final one on this line is All We Can Save, which is edited by a couple different writers, Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Kate Wilkinson. And Ayanna Eliza on Instagram is a superstar. You may have caught my Instagram story where she was singing with Stacey Abrams to a climate talk somewhere in the last week, and it was just glorious. It was great. But this is a collection of essays and poetry and short fiction, I think, even, that is people dealing with the climate crisis now. And so it's like success stories, especially. It's people grieving, obviously, and talking about the bad things that are happening, but also the truth and courage part is getting at the fact that these are things that we can follow and model on and have hope for the future, because people are acting in community to address those bad effects. Of course, it's nothing corporate in there. It's all community changes. I'm on a different tab, so let me just check that I'm not neglecting the chat. Leslie says, I want to read Moon of the Crusted Snow. I just don't know when. Yeah, Wob has new books too. So this is like an older, like a backlist title. So you've got your pick. You just don't know when. I know it's hard. Allergic to hype. Yes, that is me. That was funny. Hi, Kat. Hi, Margaret and friends. It's been a while since I've seen Richard and Emma in the chat. Nice to see you. And we're talking November Readathon Recs. So the ones I'm focusing on here in this bookshop.org list are Nonfiction November and Indigenous literature, which is sometimes called Indigathon, sometimes called Skoden, sometimes called Studis. So it's evolved over the years, but I'm just keeping it as Indigenous Lit because that's the spirit. Our next line here, I've already talked about Braining Sweetgrass, which is both Indigenous and nonfiction. Oak Flat is the same. It's a double dipper. This is by Lauren Redness, and it's about a small piece of land and the tribe's experience over a century, about fighting to retain that land that is part of their sacred homeland, but I think has been fought over for mineral rights, mining rights, scientific exploration rights. This is a place in New Mexico or Arizona or right by the border, I think, where people wanted to put an observatory on. And it sort of recalls to me the fact that they did this in Hawaii as well, with some of the sacred mountains for the indigenous Hawaiians, putting an observatory in to monitor the skies, but also the volcanoes in a very, again, steamrolling way. So there was an interesting, when you think about interesting bedfellows and that phrase, the church actually became a player in the scientific observatory fight against the native population. So there's lots of things going on in Oak Flat. We're talking about the silver mining history. We're talking about new mining interests. So I can't remember if it was copper or cobalt or something new, but like one of the tech metals that's needed. Another company coming in and trying to claim, eminent domain rights, which only the government can do, but sometimes the government is complicit, to be able to mine this stuff when already like the last round from a century ago of crap is not cleaned up, like the tailings piles and stuff. So just like knowing that this happens around the country to lots of different communities, it's good to be able to get details on one example so that you can think, okay, this is playing out in many different communities in different ways. But knowing that will color your understanding of the extraction industries, the oil and gas industries, and pipeline politics, shall we say, in a new way. Really good reporting. The next one is Milltown, which is not Indigenous, but it does work for Nonfiction November. And it's very similar. So I put these next to each other because this is happening in Maine. And it's similarly written by someone who's part of the community. But she is going into her family and her antecedents history of being poor Acadian folks. So Maine has an interesting relationship with Canada and sort of the borders there. She talks about her Maine community being a site for lots of mills, so paper mills especially. And there's sort of a history of cancer from the runoff of the paper mills that people were not facing up to or paying for, because you can't prove it, this sort of corporate irresponsibility. So she's talking about identity things in her family coming down, as well as environmental things and how they intersect in Milltown. This is Carrie Arsenault, and the sort of the future of that type of community. So again, this is one example of lots of different people's experiences being in post-industrial towns. So I think of like I don't know if it's I don't know if people own this or don't like it, but the Rust Belt. So the places, especially in the upper Midwest around the Great Lakes, that used to be powerhouses of industrial activity and have had problems converting and modernizing and finding new businesses to anchor employment in that area. So Milltown is Maine. It's not in that area, but exactly the same sort of struggle of how do we modernize in a responsible way? How do we have employment and communities that are flourishing without polluting the waterways and having terrible things happen to the wildlife, etc. So I thought that was a really great exploration of that. Then we've got Light Rain Sometimes Fall, which I've talked about several times. It's kind of like Orchard. This is a British writer, Lev Perkian, who is a conductor. And during the pandemic, he thought, I'll do a bit of a nature study, right? And he took Japan's tradition of mini seasons. So instead of examining 4 seasons of how nature changes around him, there's about 5 days in each micro season. And he sort of tracked what Japan calls them. And it's going to be very different from his just outside London house and environment, and observed what changed for him and how he changed because of his observations. So this is one where I really like the cover as well, and really enjoyed reading his basic like nature journal throughout the year. And finally, on this line, we've got Nowhere Exactly by M.G. Vasanji. I loved listening to this. This is about identity and belonging from someone who is part of the arts community in Canada. So if you're looking for Canadian literature, which is not a thing this November, but does work for nonfiction November if you're looking to complete CanLit this year, he's examining what it means to have divided identities. So he grew up in East Africa, but his antecedents, his ethnic identity is also rooted in India. And so he's sort of examining being in Canada, having East African roots, having Indian forebears. What does that mean for culture, for religion, for community, for the arts scene, for claiming identity in the new space? I just found this to be a really loaded is not the word, but like deconstructionist exploration of identity, which I had not read before and I really liked. No, I have read it before. I think I have it on this list. Yes, I do. Okay, so that's coming up, and I'll check back on the chat. We've got we've got some people here that I missed. So Kat says, I'm participating in Nonfiction November and the Moore Montgomery Challenge. Oh, Ella Montgomery. Nice. So Anne of Green Gables, which is also Canadian literature. So that's neat. We've got A Mad World in the house. I'm tea drunk on Da Hong Pao. Never too early to be tea drunk. That's a good reminder. I'm going to take a drink of tea. Mine is oversteeped stewed tea, unfortunately, because I slept in this morning. I woke up from 3 to 5 a.m. So I ended up sleeping in until almost 8, which doesn't usually happen. My mind was going, let me tell you. Leslie says, wow, the church got involved. Okay, I need to read that. It was crazy. It's a crazy story. It's also got a little bit of like the rituals that they do on the mountain and why they're sacred. So it was really interesting. Everyone's saying hi. Gareth is here to say hi from Books, Songs, and Magic. Excellent. Gareth says, I'm concentrating on fiction in November, but love these recommendations. Yeah, there's a couple more fiction that are Indigenous lit. So in case you're wondering. Diane says, I love the cover of Light Rains Sometimes Fall. Japan. Oh, I'll check that one out. Yeah. So at the beginning of every chapter, he put the name of the season in Japanese and the observations that usually happen and what it's known for, and then he explains like the thing that he observed or what changed in the chapter, and sort of comes to his own conclusion about what he would call his version of the micro season. It was delightful and nice to read slowly, I thought. Jim's going to make some rooibos tea. Excellent idea. Tea drunk. Okay, next line we have without reservations. So this is a underrated writer called Alice Steinbach, and she's no longer with us, but she was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. You see a theme. I like journalists writing memoirs. They're pretty good at it. It's called Without Reservations: The Travels of an Independent Woman. And I read this so long ago. But basically, it's a woman who is breaking free of her marriage and her job and kind of taking a step back to travel around the world and reset her expectations for herself and the rest of her life, her retired life. And I just thought it was so freeing. And if you are in a situation, Leslie, where you're in between and you're maybe trying to like reset expectations, I think this might be a really valuable book to check out from the library. So there you go. Nonfiction November. Fox and I, also nonfiction November, also a memoir. This one by Catherine Raven. And she is a scientist who was working up in Montana and did a lot of sort of remote, in the wild, not connected to people, observation work of nature. And one of the things that happened when she did this, doing surveys and recording stuff, was she started to have this weird recurring viewing or like meeting of this fox near the place where she had bought property and was living. And as she sort of got invested in whether this fox showed up and how this fox did and its welfare, she sort of revolutionized her thinking about how animals are emotional beings and have relationships. And I just thought this was a really new way of thinking about this. And it kind of reminds me about people who process differently and how that can be a rich vein of understanding, because when you think differently about things and you discuss them, maybe you're on different pages to start, but you both gain from the other's viewpoint, at least in most cases, I think. And so learning a little bit more about animals behavior, and how humans consider animals and how that might need to change was really valuable. So Fox and I was interesting to listen to. And the book that I was hinting at that is a lot like Nowhere Exactly, really deep, diving deep into identity issues. It, for all the sociologists out there that are curious, is Self-Portrait in Black and White by Thomas Chatterton Williams. And this is not the cover I read, but it's the one that's available in Bookshop. And it's his examination of race in his own life. We get considerations of America and also outside America, because he lives in France for a while. And when you only consider race from the American viewpoint, you are too close to realize a lot of things. And so I really like how he examines the past, his family attitudes, as well as how he's thinking and how he's passing on what he thinks to his children, who are going to be biracial as well, and just expectations and boxes people fit into and what we might want to move to. He's really honest about his own disappointments and like changes in his thinking, which I really appreciated as someone from the outside. So yeah, really good book, Self-Portrait in Black and White. Then we've got one out of left field, which is another nonfiction November pick called Humanize: A Maker's Guide to Designing Our Cities. Again, sociology flag. So people who like thinking about sustainable cities and like efficient living and design, this is someone who is not an architect. And he talks about why he's not an architect and the difference between architects and designers, which I didn't know about at all. So this is eye-opening for me. He's talking about, how do we design houses and homes and public buildings, and our relationship to the road and our relationship to parks, and how buildings make us feel, both like emotionally and health-wise. Like, and how the field of design and buildings is really sort of messed up. He's talking about this from the UK perspective, I think, but with lessons that are applicable around the world. He does do a bit of a deep dive into Barcelona, which I think many people know is like a spectacular city design-wise, but how that came about and how we can maybe evolve our own cities into something a bit more like that. So I really liked this, and I don't think enough people know about it either. So another underrated book by Thomas Heatherwick. And then finally on this line, I've got Blood Sisters. So this is not nonfiction. This is fiction. This is a novel by Vanessa Lilly that qualifies for Readathon or Studis. And this is, I can't remember if it's her debut or whether it's just like her first breakout. But it's a detective who is in the federal government, I believe, but ends up going back to something that is like state or tribal land. It's like remains that she's needed to approve or, you know, check out before something is done with it for construction. And then she gets involved in all of this like jurisdictional fights as well as a murder investigation, and there's like some supernatural stuff thrown in. So I loved reading this book. I thought it was super suspenseful, a little spooky, and I love the supernatural bit, and it's just really well told, like very fast paced and engaging. And she's got a new one out, I think, so I need to definitely read her second detective book. All right, so before I go to the final line here, Gareth is asking about bookshop.org. So there is a UK version. I think it's just bookshop.co.uk. So you can order them on your end, but you may not be able to get my shop on that site. And it's basically the same distribution network as Ingram. So you get most books around the world, and it's just not Amazon. So it's let's see. I know Libro.fm's statistics better, but I'm pretty sure bookshop.org does the affiliates for different shops. So it supports indie bookshops with some of its profits. And just like Amazon has affiliate sales, it allows people to make their own shops and affiliate sales like I have done, but also actual brick and mortar bookshops do this and can make a better profit margin that way. But they also donate some of their own profits that are not in that tiny percentage to independent bookstores at the end of the year. So I don't know if they're a B corporation, which means like they have a set of guidelines that they do for fair labor practices and that sort of thing, but I suspect they are. So check out the UK version and see if that works. Yes, it's just the online sort of clearing warehouse, just like Amazon is, to try to take away some of the market from Amazon so people can get books, because bookshop.org is all about books. And so Amazon doesn't care about books. They use books as their loss leader. They rip off authors and discount them without their permission. And so this is just a way to get books from people who love them and are trying to support bookshops and bookstores rather than go to Amazon. They use the same networks. Well, Amazon has its own now. What they used to use was Ingram. So yeah, they use the main one. Leslie says, noted. Got to keep that serotonin going. Yeah. Okay, I'll look it up. Excellent. Yeah. Cool. Our final line here, Warrior Girl Unearthed, I already talked about, is an Angeline Boulley. It's her second book. It's in the same universe, but only tangentially related to Firekeeper's Daughter. I didn't mention where it takes place. So it takes place in the waters between the US and Canada. I think it's called Sugar Island, that's off Michigan. So I don't know if that's it on anyone's bingo card, if that helps them. But yeah, contemporary fiction, tribal government, political issues, and great fiction. There are some content warnings for this one. So it does deal with missing and murdered Indigenous women as as an issue. So if that is a worry for you, I would look up content warnings. Then we've got Carrie by Toni Jensen, a memoir of survival on stolen land. In fact, I should probably have Alicia's book up here instead, because that one made more of an impression on me. A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, which is really good. It's a like neurodiverse memoir of being someone in an indigenous tribe in the US. In the US? I think so. And I can't remember where Toni Jensen is from. But this is when I was reading a lot of memoirs and nonfiction. So it qualifies for both readathons, but I can't remember much about it because this was probably like 3 years ago. And it's a library book, so I didn't like turn down the corners and keep it on my shelf. I think this one was more the tone of Teresa Mailhot, Heartberries, which I didn't get along with as well. So let me know if you've read it and whether your mileage is different. So we'll leave that one in there. Then I've got Black Ghost of Empire, which is nonfiction November, not indigenous, but it does, I mean, it's talking about the imperial project and the British Empire and the slavery and revolts and rebellions in the abolition movement. It's called The Long Death of Slavery and the Failure of Emancipation by Chris Manjapra. And I was really wowed when I listened to this book. So I read it about the same time as Nowhere Exactly, and they really played well together. So when he says the failure of emancipation, what he's talking about is emancipate versus abolish. Abolish means do away with, no longer exist, destruct, right? Emancipate from the Latin is to let go of or to hand off as a gift. And that really colors the legal and aftermath sort of effects of slavery's evolution, let's say. So I did take this to heart in a lot of ways, and it fired up a lot of what I wrote about in my current novel, which takes place in Glasgow and has to do with the wealthy in Glasgow making their fortunes off of tobacco plantations in the US before independence, and then sugar and rum, sugar plantations in the West Indies in the Caribbean before they got independence much later. And the colonial projects and the imperial mode of living that persists. So you'll see the ghosts of things that he researches in this book that still exist today, which is really haunting. So that's, I think, why I was really affected by it. Can't recommend enough The Black Ghost of Empire by Chris Manjapra. And then we've got the two that are on my pile of possibilities. So I do need to put Alicia Elliott's book back in here. I don't know how that got taken out. Yes. So we've got Serotonin. We've got a Mama Maggie. Yes. And I flagged take the content warning seriously, says Mackie, about Warrior Girl Unearthed, for sure. Yes. Gareth says Black Ghost of Empire looks good for me. Only $10.99 in the UK. Just checked it out. Awesome. Yeah, sometimes I will go to Blackwell's because they have really good deals, and I'll get like a pile. I haven't done that since June, so I'm being good. But sometimes they have good deals too. But yeah, Bookshop gives money back to independent bookstores or the people who you find it from, and I don't think Blackwell's does unless you go through an affiliate link. So, but yeah, so that is my pile and my recommendations. This is the big long stream. So there we go. If you are curious about any of these and want to read them with me, let me know. Oh, Gareth worked for Blackwell's for 6 years. Wow. Like in a shop or in like the corporate structure? Because that's a dream job as a bookseller. That's pretty cool. Oh, and the only other news is that I got a haircut. So like I can pull my fingers through my hair now. So no more long braids, but I did sort of leave it long. But I can actually like brush it now for some reason. I think it's hormonal, whatever it was. The shampoo wasn't working. It was just gross. So I finally got a haircut for the first time in 2 years yesterday, and I'm so happy about it. So what have we got coming up? We've got November readathons. We've got mood reading. We've got my cover reveal coming up on Friday, Thursday, if you are a patron member. And if you want to get it a day early, you can chime in here. I'll put this in the chat in case you're not aware. I've been doing this for like the last month, so hopefully, I think everyone who's going to sign up for the free follow is on it. See, now the chat comes back. I don't know. It's weird. I'm going to have to check out that chat box. It doesn't seem to be working well. So yeah, that's this week. And so after Halloween, I hope you all have a safe and happy Halloween on Thursday, or Samhain, or whatever you want to call it. November 1st is National Author Day. Has nothing to do with Nano, so you don't have to like boycott it. But National Author Day. And for several years now, I've put it on my list of like, do something for National Author Day, Margaret. Come on. And I never get around to it. I have a notification on my Google Calendar that is like a week before. But I'm trying to get a book out. So things are pretty busy right now. Things are a little crazy. And yet, I have been getting off my butt to try to coordinate guest appearances, guest blogs, interviews, all that kind of stuff. And I am going to be on our lovely friend JD Estrada's channel on Friday for National Author Day. So look forward to that. Maybe not if you're in the UK, it'll be a bad time zone. But for West Coast peeps, East Coast peeps, it could be in your future to attend live. If not, you can always check out the replay. And we'll just be talking author stuff, writer stuff, what we're excited about. And JD is always lovely and funny. So do catch that. I'll be on his channel on Friday evening. Other than that, and Diwali. Okay, thank you. More holidays, more better. Exactly. Yay. So I think that's all for me today. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you were inspired for at least one of these 3 readathons, and maybe join me in some of my reading, or wait for the next wrap up and see if it's worth it before you dip your toe in. That's totally okay too. But yeah, that is us today. Take care, everyone. Happy reading. Thanks, JC. And I'll see you again soon. Bye.